That factory seems to be more valuable than I thought. I used to think it was boring, but maybe I was wrong. If I had known, I might have taken a job there. Since we're family, promotion would be guaranteed. Returning home from the funeral, I was shocked to hear my husband and son talking. I work at the factory Dad ran, but my husband and son, who work at a major trading company, had always looked down on the factory. However, seeing the large number of people who attended Dad's funeral, their attitudes changed. It's infuriating to think they might consider taking a job at our factory just for fun, thinking they'd automatically get promoted because they're family. There are people who earn their livelihood and take pride in their work at that company. I can't stand the idea of those people being insulted because of me. Quietly, I decided to pack my things. I won't ever come back to this house again. I'm Jessica. I was born and raised as the only daughter of a small factory owner. My husband's name is John. John was a salesperson at a trading company, and we got married about 30 years ago and had a son named David. David, influenced by Dad, grew up to be a sociable and outgoing child. But more than outgoing, he's flashy and loves to show off. Before we got married, I found John's flashy nature refreshing and attractive. But after we got married and David grew up to be the same way, I felt out of place. What worries me most is their sense of money. They both spend money recklessly, often putting a strain on our finances. We've had countless arguments about it, but we've never been able to see eye to eye. I never imagined this dissatisfaction would lead to such a big issue. I've always worked at the factory Dad ran. Having worked there for so long, I've been entrusted with the position of managing director. Dad wanted David to help with the factory management, but young and flashy David was more interested in the trading company's sales job where John worked. I like talking to people, and I think I'd be good at sales, David said to Dad, but behind his back. I hate the idea of working at a boring factory, I heard him say. Dad seemed to sense David's feelings and stopped talking to him about the factory after that. It was painful to see Dad's disappointed back, but neither John nor David were interested in the factory management, treating it as a small subcontracting business from the start. It's upsetting to have the factory, which Dad and I value so much, looked down upon. However, I gave up trying to argue with John, knowing our perspectives were too different. We're going on a road trip with some friends soon. I'm thinking of buying a motorcycle and taking David along. What? But motorcycles are expensive, aren't they? Are you buying it? Jessica, you'll chip in half. As a dual-income couple, we had agreed to split living expenses, but any other money we earned could be spent freely. You can't just spring this on me. Seeing my reluctance, John raised his eyebrows. He's a salesperson too, so networking is important. It's for David's sake, come on. All right. But along with the motorcycle, can you take David to visit Grandpa once in a while? He seems to be feeling worse again and might have to go to the hospital for a bit. Seeing his grandson might cheer him up. My dad was still energetic enough to run the company, but age was catching up, and he had been in and out of the hospital recently for short stays and tests. Mom passed away a few years ago, so I worried about Dad living alone. However, John responded indifferently to my plea. Yeah, well, I'm really busy right now, but I'll get to it eventually. I'm talking about David, you know? Lately, John gets irritated whenever I point something out. This time too, he immediately glared at me with a displeased look. Stop nagging! We talk about work a lot, so I know what's going on. Both he and I are in sales. I need to teach him my techniques. Hearing that, I started to think that both of them just wanted an excuse to have fun. For a long time, John used to be away from home a lot, claiming it was for work, leaving me to handle childcare and housework almost entirely by myself. David, seeing his dad like that, would often say outdated things like, "That's just how men are." I'm worried that with this kind of attitude, he might never get married. Anyway, that's how it is. Take care of the motorcycle thing. Okay. Later, I found out that David had met with my dad behind my back. David came by unexpectedly. I thought something was up, but he just wanted money to buy a motorcycle helmet. Hearing that casually from Dad, I felt troubled. Really? John told me that David asked for half the money to buy the motorcycle. David said he would buy the helmet himself. Well, he's my cute grandson, so I gave him the money. Like many grandfathers, my dad is also lenient with his grandchildren. However, as he grew older and saw more of their selfish behavior, his patience was wearing thin. Even though he's my son, I was also getting fed up with his selfishness. And the same could be said for John, who I married out of love. John never helped with housework or childcare, always claiming he was busy with work but spending his time playing. Back then, my mom was still around to help, and my workplace was understanding, so I managed, but now I was feeling my affection for him fading. Jessica, I'm sorry, but I'll have to be admitted to the hospital again. Please take care of the company. All right, I understand. Honestly, I'm starting to think about divorce. I can't rely on David to take over the factory, and he probably doesn't want to either. It might be better to find someone, even if they're not family, to take over. I'll talk to Dad about it after this hospital stay. I'm sure he'll agree. Since Dad was admitted to the hospital, my days have been hectic with work and caregiving. Everyone at the workplace has been helping to keep things running. It's busy, but thinking about how proud I want to be when Dad comes home keeps me going. The real problem is caregiving. John and David continue to use work as an excuse not to visit the hospital. Ever since I scolded David for asking Dad for allowance money, he's been in a bad mood. John sides with David. Despite being grown men, they only visit Dad when they need money, which makes me want to cry out of frustration. Did I raise him wrong? Jessica, don't say that. You've done your best, don't worry too much. Dad, weak from being in the hospital, tried to comfort me. At times like this, I feel I can't go against Dad. I was deeply dissatisfied that John and David didn't respect Dad. I might not be able to leave the hospital this time. Dad, don't say such things. My voice was almost a scream. I had a hunch. And the company was running smoothly. Thanks to Dad's foresight, he had already allocated the work in advance. No, I'm too old now. I've prepared and accepted it. I'll leave the company to you. Even if I get out of the hospital, I'll retire. Dad. I couldn't say anything more. Dad had worked hard on the front lines for years. As he had declared, he never left the hospital. Dad passed away a month later. It was a peaceful end. It felt like I had lost my only ally in this world, and I clung to Dad, crying for a while. But I couldn't just stand still. I had to do what needed to be done. Everyone at the company was willing to help. The problem, of course, was John and David. Charles passed away? That's unfortunate. I thought you didn't even visit him in the hospital, as I saw their regretful faces. Swallowing my words, I proceeded with the funeral preparations. Why do we need such a big funeral home? A small family and relatives-only ceremony is enough. Yeah, let's just see him off with just us. The company people and business partners will come. We can't do that. You two always say how important work connections are. When I showed them the plan I had discussed with the funeral home director, John and David were reluctant. The people who didn't even visit him in the hospital suggesting a small, family-only funeral was laughable. They probably didn't want to spend money. It wasn't even their money, but it was so annoying. He was just a small factory owner, right? There's no way that many people will come to this big funeral home. Yeah, it's not like it was a significant factory. Why are we trying to show off? What did you just say? When I raised my eyebrows, David, realizing his slip-up, awkwardly looked away. I knew they looked down on the factory, but this was the first time they had said it so plainly. They had grown up on the money from that factory, still getting allowances at 25 years old. How did they turn out like this? Well, anyway, I'm against it. We don't need such a large-scale funeral. What does John, who knows nothing about the company, understand? I work in sales at a major trading company. I've attended more of these events than you. I know better than you. John didn't say it as bluntly as David, but it was clear he looked down on the factory too. John's face turned red as he glared at me angrily. If there's not enough money, I won't contribute at all. It's Jessica's fault for wanting to show off. I was dumbfounded that he could say that after making me pay for his motorcycle and golf expenses, claiming they were necessary for work. How many times had John asked me to help for the sake of his work success? The money I had given little by little now amounted to a significant sum. It was enough to cover another funeral of the scale John was begrudging. Don't worry, the company will handle the funeral, and I'll pay for anything that comes up, so it's fine. Do whatever you want. You always told me to stop wasting money, but now you're spending it on this? He also seemed unhappy about me spending money. Do they really think that our parents' money is their own? Grandpa is the president. This isn't wasting money. David, it's pointless to argue. Let's go. I should be the one saying that. They glared at me with resentment before leaving the room. They're probably going to say they're working, but actually go somewhere to have fun. They planned to attend the funeral, so I had to tolerate it. Once they stopped interfering with the funeral arrangements, everything proceeded smoothly. Things were a bit awkward at home, but I was too busy to pay attention. I handled the household chores as a minimum, but beyond that, I was swamped with Dad's funeral preparations and my own work. On the day of the funeral, John and David were astonished at the turnout. So many people showed up. There are even politicians and celebrities. Isn't that the president of Dad's company? The funeral hall I had arranged was filled with people. For the two who had belittled Dad's small factory and company, it was unexpected. John hurried over to greet his company's president. Thank you for attending, sir. I'm John from the sales department. Ah, yes. I'm very sorry for your loss. He was a remarkable man, and I share your grief. Your words mean a lot. After greeting John, the president cut the conversation short and walked toward me. John watched in surprise. You must be having a hard time after your father's passing. Is Jessica going to take over the factory? We won't know for sure until we read Dad's will, but that's my intention. I see. As managing director, you should be fine. We will support you. The previous president was a great help to us. John and David couldn't understand why the president of a major trading company was speaking to a managing director of a small factory as an equal. However, as soon as I mentioned Dad's will, their attitudes changed. With a sense of unease, I mingled with the guests, sharing memories of Dad. After the funeral, I was left to clean up. David and John hurried home without any intention of helping. From the start, I was the only family member involved in the preparations, so it was expected, but I still felt a strange sense of exhaustion. There are still many things to do, so let's continue tomorrow. Yes, Managing Director. Managing Director, please get some rest today. I thanked the employees who had helped and left the funeral hall. The cleanup was finished earlier than expected, and I looked forward to a rare restful night at home. I'm home. I called out, but there was no reply. I wondered if they were still in a bad mood because of the funeral, but the voices coming from the living room sounded odd. Curious, I peeked in. David and John were talking excitedly. That factory is worth more than we thought. I thought it was insignificant, but maybe we were wrong. We should have considered working there. As family, promotions are guaranteed. Hearing their words clearly, I was stunned into silence. I couldn't let them take over the factory and company we had fought so hard to protect, treating it as a game. And thinking that being family guaranteed promotions was a huge mistake. That's right. It's only because Mom is a woman that she's the managing director. The employees would prefer a male president. Their dismissive words about me and the company made my body tremble with anger. Taking childcare leave and still getting promoted must be nice. Men can't get ahead even if they work hard without taking any leave. Childcare leave isn't the kind of break they think it is. It's more like taking a break from one job to do another. I was painfully aware of my failures in raising my children. How could they have grown up to be so narrow-minded and outdated? And to top it off, they even looked down on their own mother, mocking me. Well, it's not too late. Why not help Mom out and change jobs? After all, everything will be yours eventually. His behavior was largely influenced by John. John never helped with childcare or housework, but he always indulged David in expensive hobbies whenever he felt like it. This has been the case since David was a child, and it hasn't changed even now. That's true. Next president has a nice ring to it. I'll talk to Mom about it. The comfortable lives of them were built on my sacrifices. It was at that moment that the words I had been trying to avoid thinking about finally took shape in my mind. If things continued like this, I would be trampled by them forever. Moreover, the factory and company that my parents and I, along with our employees, had worked so hard to protect were being treated like toys by John and David. Many people worked there, relying on their jobs for their livelihoods and finding meaning in their work. I couldn't let my mistakes affect our employees. I quietly made up my mind and walked past the living room where the two men were chatting. Since I was planning to stay over for the funeral preparations, I had already packed some of my things. Maybe because I had been contemplating divorce deep down, I could gather my things quickly. 3 seconds later, I was out of the house. They didn't even notice. Without looking back, I got into my car. Since it was convenient, I decided to go back to my dad's house, where he lived alone. Selling it was out of the question with all the memories attached, and it was spacious enough. Although it felt a bit too large for one person, Dad was well known in the town, and many people felt it would be a shame to sell the house. I had already been staying over when Dad's health was poor, so I was all set to live there. I mailed the divorce papers to our house. The day after I left, John called me multiple times. Hello, Jessica. Where are you? The loud voice on the other end of the phone startled me, making me feel suspicious. Where? At my dad's. Have the divorce papers not arrived yet? Divorce papers? What are you talking about? I haven't heard anything. He was clearly flustered. He must be worried about losing his cash cow. I let out a big sigh. The differences in our sense of money have become too much to overlook lately. The kids are grown up now, so it's fine. You two can enjoy yourselves. What the? No, wait, let's talk. I'll fix my mistakes. He didn't yell angrily as usual. Since he saw me as a money tree, he forced himself to sound sweet and try to appease me. And David was no different. Mom, leaving suddenly like this isn't fair. Come back, let's talk. We're family, right? David, you're 25 now. You should be able to manage without Mom. Stand on your own. Standing on my own and Mom leaving are two different things. We're family. It's lonely without you, regardless of independence. Even he, usually so arrogant, was now acting humble. Despite always leaving the household matters to me and spending all their time having fun. They had been looking down on my workplace and me, acting as if they were superior. Now, their attitude had completely changed, talking about feeling lonely, being a family, wanting to discuss things. It was too late for that now. I felt nauseous thinking that behind their change in attitude, they were seeing my father's company. But I lived at my parents' house. They knew the address, so if I tried to outright refuse them, they would just show up at my doorstep. After some consideration, I decided to talk with them. All right. But remember, I want a divorce. Oh. Understood. Let's just talk first. Both John and David were underestimating me. They were in sales and believed they could talk their way out of anything. thinking they could easily persuade me if we met in person. They were in for a surprise. I was fed up with them. To completely cut ties, I started preparing for the meeting. The meeting was set for 3 days later. Despite their usual excuses of being too busy or having work, they quickly agreed to meet. I wanted a week to prepare, but they didn't allow it. They must have thought they could talk me into anything with the two of them against me. They probably suspected I would seek advice and gain insight if given a week. I had planned to do exactly that. However, if my way of confronting them head-on was blocked, I would find another way. By the time I said I wanted a divorce, I was already preparing. The plan was just accelerated, which was no inconvenience to me. "I've brought a lawyer. Nice to meet you today." It was a lawyer who had helped us a lot with company matters. Very famous locally and strong in divorce cases. John and David seemed intimidated by the mention of a lawyer. Hey, that's a bit aggressive, isn't it? Bringing a lawyer to a family discussion?" Their nervous laughter was pitiful. Their voices shook. They were likely more unprepared than they had thought. "I told you, I want a divorce. If you won't agree, this is normal." "Mom, do you really want to cut ties with us that badly?" David looked at me with a sad expression. Before, I might have been swayed by this, but after hearing their conversation in the living room, I felt no affection for my husband or my son. "Yes. If you think you can climb the company ladder just because you're family, then of course I want to cut ties." "What?" David's face turned red, and he fell silent. He never imagined I had overheard their conversation that day. Despite me being out that day, they didn't suspect a thing. "Jessica, why would you?" "Oh, I came back without you noticing, and you were too engrossed in your conversation. I was truly appalled. I don't want either of you to lay a finger on that company." John looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. To add to the pressure, the lawyer handed John some papers. "Since the beginning of your marriage, I've been informed that you've been asking Jessica for money for work purposes. Jessica kept detailed records of the amounts, the dates, and the purposes you stated. We would like you to return the total amount. If you comply, we will not seek additional compensation in the divorce proceedings." "What? Money?" John snatched the papers and stared at them intently. It was an invoice for the same amount as Dad's funeral, which he had angrily refused to pay. But this is... Oh, right. There's money for David too, isn't there? Isn't this child support?" I was exasperated by his pathetic excuse. They are really greedy people. "Child support doesn't cover things after he became an adult and got a job. Although I could have said that the money for David was excluded, it's already been deducted from the amount." John's face turned pale as he glared at the papers. He seemed incredulous. It looked like he didn't remember exactly how much he had spent on what. "Ever since you started working, you always wanted the best shoes, suits, and watches. You kept asking me for money, saying it was for work. I told you I was just lending it, remember? But we're a married couple, helping each other is. I don't recall you ever helping me, John." John always left all the housework and child-rearing to me. Unfortunately, without any witnesses, getting alimony through divorce court would be difficult. Fighting a long court battle with him was too bothersome, so I gave up on alimony. Even this debt repayment request was just harassment. The lawyer promised to collect it, but as long as I could protect Dad's company, I didn't care about it. John fell silent, and I watched him. In the silence, David spoke up. "If you want a divorce that badly, talk it out as a couple. But I'm Mom's son, right? Switching jobs and promotions are just temporary phases. I'll change my ways and work hard, so please forgive me." Those words already proved he hadn't changed, but did he understand that? John looked shocked, feeling betrayed. "David, are you going to abandon your dad? If you keep making debts like this, Mom will be fed up. I'm Mom's son. Even if you want to cut ties, you can't." It seemed he decided to abandon Dad and cozy up to me, considering the inheritance. He's as shallow as his father. I've been raising him all this time, so why did he turn out like this? Where did I go wrong in raising him? Lately, these thoughts have been consuming me. That's right. You can't cut family ties so easily. John slumped his shoulders, and David smiled. John looked like he was about to grab smiling David. They used to be such a close father and son, but when money gets involved, this is what happens. Selfish people are terrifying. But, David, I don't want someone like you, who just wants to become president or get a promotion, to be involved in Dad's company. What? David's face froze. At the same time, the doorbell rang. John looked puzzled. What? Who could it be at this time? It's a guest I invited. What? John and David visibly panicked. It was too much trouble to explain, so I got up and let the guest in by myself. Thank you for coming, Mr. President. When Jessica consulted me, I couldn't refuse. President! The visitor was the president of the trading company where John worked. An old acquaintance of Dad and a business partner for the factory. John hadn't known until the funeral, but we had been close for quite some time. But just like the lawyer, he was merely an acquaintance of Dad's. I heard that one of our employees is causing trouble. I'm sorry about that. No, it's my husband, so you don't need to worry about it, sir. Rather, I'm sorry for causing you trouble. It's fine. The previous president took good care of me, and I want to maintain a long relationship with your company. The president, with a kind smile, looked at John. In front of his employer, John straightened his posture, beads of cold sweat running down his face. Your name is John, right? Someone like you, who doesn't know what to do, is a problem for our company. I'm sorry, but can you give up? Huh? You mean the factory? Seeing John's surprise, the president sighed deeply and shook his head. John, unable to confront the president due to his position, seemed confused about the situation. The previous president was good at separating personal and professional matters. Because of that, Jessica ended up marrying someone like you. We were fortunate that we couldn't stop our dealings with you due to your misunderstanding and rudeness. What does that mean? David, right? You're from Smith Trading Sales Department. Mr. Smith wants to talk to you too. Here, the phone is connected. Have a word with him. Wah! Oh, okay. Just having the president in the room changed the atmosphere drastically. With a face like a kind uncle, the president handed his mobile phone to David. Smith Trading's president is also one of our business partners. Mr. Smith will probably tell David the same thing. John divorced Jessica. But this is a family matter. But John, you care about that company, right? Then you can't stay. Even if you didn't care, you still can't. David and John, you're not fit for management. The current president's words carried a different weight. John was at a loss for words, desperately searching for a rebuttal. John, do you know how many patents that company holds? Jessica is already managing those patents. Even one of those patents is a national treasure. It's extremely valuable. We can't have someone who doesn't understand that value around her. Hearing about the patents for the first time, John was frozen in shock, his mouth agape. Ignoring John's bewilderment, the president continued in a relaxed tone. Do you understand? Mishandling even one patent could harm not just our company, but her company and the country. We can't let someone who doesn't understand that be involved with that company. David was probably hearing the same thing from his own president. Seeing John still trying to argue, the president declared, "If you don't want to end up in dire straits, stop being greedy." It was as if he was saying, if you keep getting involved, you'll be crushed. The president was in a position to make that happen. John probably thought of the faces of those who attended Dad's funeral. If all the other company presidents, lawyers, politicians, and famous people shared the president's view, John and David would be like paper blown away by the wind. I understand. Imagining his own downfall, John lowered his head and weakly uttered. David, who was told the same by his own president, also promised not to get involved with me anymore. After that, I was able to get a divorce and have the money John owed me repaid. John and David were demoted due to the recent scandal and were forced to relocate. John was transferred to the distant south, while David was sent to the far north. On top of that, they were assigned to dead-end jobs, with significantly lower salaries and no prospects for promotion. It's unsettling to leave them unchecked. We plan to keep them on board. Mr. Smith had the same idea. Feeling an immense sense of dread from the CEO's words, I nonetheless accepted his offer with gratitude, knowing it was a lifeline. I planned to repay this debt by supporting the company Dad left behind. Freed from John and David, I threw myself into my work, living a fulfilling life every day. It's the company my dad and mom left behind. Some people even say this company is a treasure of America. The factory that John and David mocked is my lifeblood and one of the small and medium-sized businesses that quietly support America. Even just one patent is considered a national treasure. With the CEO's words in my heart, I strive to work hard every day. My father-in-law's turn came, and he went into the examination room with the nurse after his name was called. However, when I tried to accompany him, the nurse stopped me. Puzzled, I was guided in the opposite direction of the examination room and called into a separate room. In the room, there was a slender doctor, and his almond-shaped eyes stared intently at me. Then, as if he had made up his mind, he opened his mouth. "How much do you know?" "Huh?" I was stunned, not knowing what he was talking about. "Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, well." His halting response made me grow more suspicious. What was he trying to say? "Geez, you're as bad at talking as ever." At that voice, I turned around and there stood my husband David, who was supposed to be away on a business trip, with his arms crossed. Why was David here? Ignoring my confusion, David said, "I want you to look at this." As he spoke, David operated his smartphone and showed it to me. "What? No way! Why?" My eyes widened as I stared intently at the screen. My pottery creations were being sold on an unfamiliar website. Surprise and agitation swirled together, and my head was in a mess. Of course, I had no idea about this. Who would do such a thing, and why? I felt more sadness than anger. "I need to check something with Tom. About Dad." Those words made me flinch. What did he intend to confirm about Nick? I waited intently for David's next words. "My name is Mary. I live with my husband David and Nick." "Nick, the weather is nice today. The azaleas in the garden are starting to bloom." "Is that so? Is it that time of year already?" Nick, who was laughing beside me, is actually completely blind. I knew that Nick's eyesight hadn't been very good for a while. He said that the edges of his vision had turned black and the range he could see had gradually narrowed. The cause was unknown, and treatment didn't progress, but he was able to live with the help of his wife. But after losing his wife, his condition suddenly worsened. Neither David nor I ever thought he would lose his sight so quickly. David said he couldn't leave Nick alone, living by himself without being able to see. That's true. It's dangerous to be alone. There have been a lot of scams lately, too. David and I talked it over and decided to live with Nick. Nick can't work, so he now lives on disability benefits. This was something his late wife had arranged for him, and it was steadily deposited into his account every month. He had apparently been withdrawing small amounts as needed, but a considerable amount remained. With this much, we could have asked a home helper, but Nick wouldn't agree to it. He insisted that it would be a waste of money and to forget about it. I quit my job to take care of Nick. My boss said, It's a shame to lose someone as talented as you, Mary. But it couldn't be helped. I decided to work a part-time job a few days a week and take on all of Nick's care and household chores. Mary, I'm so sorry you had to quit your job. I was expecting it, so don't worry about it. How's everything going for you? Actually, the company decided to expand overseas, so I might have more business trips from now on. David works for a manufacturer, but I had never heard of him going abroad before. That's great! I was thrilled, but David looked somewhat gloomy. But I'll be lonely not being with you, Mary. He let out a small sigh and headed for the shower room. It was the first time I had seen David so downcast. He's always smiling and rarely says he's lonely. So David's words were unexpected, and I was surprised. Did my show of joy backfire? As David had said, starting the following month, he began going on more business trips and naturally spent more days away from home. I was busy every day preparing Nick's meals, cleaning the house, and going to my part-time job. But as I was shopping at the supermarket, a thought suddenly occurred to me. Taking care of Nick was easier than I had expected. When we first started living together, I thought I would have to help a lot with things like showers, going to the bathroom, and moving around the house and when we went out. I thought I would have to feed him because he probably wouldn't be able to hold a fork or anything to eat. Surprisingly, he can actually take showers and go to the bathroom all by himself. He even eats his meals quite neatly on his own. Inside the house, he walks smoothly without stumbling over boxes or anything. It's not a problem because I'm used to the house, Nick says with a laugh. Even more astonishingly, Nick can operate a smartphone for simple tasks. He makes phone calls and looks things up by skillfully using the voice recognition feature. Sometimes when I hear voices coming from Nick's room, it turns out he's chatting with the AI on his smartphone. Even I only use my smartphone for calls and messages. That being said, checkups are still necessary, so Nick goes to the hospital regularly. But whenever I offer to go with him, for some reason he insists on going alone. But there are crosswalks and it's dangerous. It's fine, there are sound signals. But you have to get on and off the bus too. I can do it by myself. Nick snaps, getting a bit angry, and leaves on his own. I secretly follow him, worried, but he really does cross the streets alone and has no problem riding the bus. Later, he tells me he walks using the voice navigation on his smartphone. Nick is stubbornly determined to do everything himself, as if he's trying to distance himself from me. But I suppose it's a good thing that I'm able to avoid the situation of being totally overwhelmed by caregiving and housework. Having some peace of mind and free time, I was able to go to a pottery workshop nearby. It was just a one-day experience, but I unexpectedly enjoyed it and got hooked right away. Since then, I've started teaching myself a little at home. I bought a pottery magazine, and while reading it, a headline caught my eye. It said that small pieces can be fired in a home oven. As I read on, it seems there really is clay like that. Most of the tools can be found at the dollar store, so you can easily do pottery at home, the article said. I decided to secretly give it a try at night whenever I could find some spare time. My grades in art class were never good in elementary and middle school. Me, starting pottery. It has me in high spirits every day, and I even hum to myself. One night, when David came to the kitchen for some water, he saw me kneading clay while humming. "What are you making? A giant cookie?" David pointed to the flattened light brown clay on the baking sheet. I was rolling it out to make a plate. "Ah. I thought it was a late-night snack," he said. "Too bad. But take a look again once it's finished." Saying goodnight, David went back to his room. David is going on another business trip starting tomorrow. He seemed to want to talk with me a bit more, but he quickly left, probably trying to be considerate. It's a strange feeling, like we're somehow out of sync, but not on bad terms. As if to shake off that feeling, I focused on my pottery. At first I was making simple shapes like plates. But as I gradually got used to it, that wasn't enough anymore. Though I can't make full-fledged pottery pieces either. While I was experimenting with what to make, a gust of wind blew the papers and envelopes off the desk. I had forgotten that I opened the window in the afternoon. I hurriedly gathered them up and used a nearby bottle as a paperweight. That's it. A paperweight would be small enough for me to make. It's not like I'm presenting it anywhere, so I decided to make one on a whim. I want something a little stylish. I pondered while kneading the clay, and the image of a cat I used to have came to mind. It was a stray that we took in and named Belle. I lovingly raised it together with David. I'll use Belle as my model. Once I decided, things moved quickly from there. What did her face look like, her paws, her legs, her tail? I slowly started to remember. In a photo on my smartphone, Belle is being held by David, looking not entirely thrilled about it. It reminded me of how the two of us and Belle happily spent time together back then. Belle is on the other side of the Rainbow Bridge now, but I wonder if she's doing well. After lots of trial and error, I finished making the Belle paperweight in about a month. I was so thrilled that I wanted to show it to someone. It just so happened I was going to lunch with my friends, so I decided to bring it and show them. My friends turned their smartphone cameras toward it, saying how cute it was. I was surprised by the unexpectedly positive reaction. Next to the pasta plate at lunch, Belle's not entirely thrilled expression had a certain charm. My friends even requested that I make one for them too. Really? But it's just an amateur handmade piece. The fact that it's handmade is apparently a plus. The following month, I brought a few more Belle paperweights in different poses. My friends each took their favorite one, and I was left with the one of Belle washing her face. A week later, I realized that I had received several messages from a friend I had given Belle's paperweight to. According to her, when she posted the paperweight on social media, she received dozens of messages within just 3 days. Most of them were asking where they could buy one for themselves. I was astonished that it had generated such a response. My friends unanimously urged me to start selling them online. They said they would definitely sell. But I hadn't made them to make money. It was just a hobby of sorts, and I was very reluctant to turn it into a business. Above all, I'm not very savvy with the internet and have no idea what to do or how to do it. I only check messages from friends every 2 to 3 days and hardly use my smartphone. As I agonized over what to do, the number of inquiries kept growing, surpassing 100. My friends must have felt bad, as they started trying to properly pay me for them. I'm the one who feels bad. I've been having them reply to messages from friends on social media, saying they're not for sale. The same topic came up again when we were having lunch. Well, maybe I should at least take enough to cover the cost of materials. After all, I'm not a professional potter by trade. When I said that would be plenty, they were happy to pay it. David was also interested in this little figurine. When he came back from a business trip and found Belle's paperweight on his desk, he exclaimed, "Hey! Isn't this Belle? Did you make this yourself?" He picked it up between his thumb and index finger and brought it over to me with a delighted look. "Yep. Spinning image, isn't it? It's amazing. This Belle is so darn cute. It's really well made." When I told him it had become a topic of conversation on social media, David was thrilled. Selling online is easy. You just make a site, post some photos, and... Don't make it sound so simple. I'll help you out. I may not look like it, but I'm a salesman, you know. Leave it to me, David said, getting enthusiastic and starting to make plans about online stores and whatnot. But selling means running a business, even if it's small. I don't have the confidence to start something like that on a whim. I'm not interested in selling them. I took Belle's paperweight from David's hand and put it back on the desk. Besides, I don't really know much about the internet. I'll support you, so. Oh, that reminds me, I finished the plate I was making the other day. Let me go get it. I opened the kitchen cupboard. I can't see what kind of expression David has on his face. When I came back from the kitchen, David was gone. On the desk, only Belle's paperweight remained, washing its face. Belle. What should I do? Belle doesn't answer. It just kept washing its face as if to say it doesn't know. One day, I came home humming, and Nick called out to me. Did something good happen? That day, I had gone to show Belle's paperweight to my pottery class teacher. I had vaguely mentioned to Nick that I was taking pottery classes, but we hadn't really talked about it much before. I went to show my teacher something I made in that pottery class I mentioned before. Nick, sitting in the living room chair, listened to my story. What kind of plate was it? This time it wasn't a plate, it was a figurine. As I said that, I felt something was off. What did Nick just say? Smiling beside me as I wondered, Nick opened his mouth again. That's great. I wonder if I could do pottery too. What? I couldn't believe my ears, but I thought this was an opportunity. This could be a chance to get closer to Nick, who tries to keep his distance. That way, I could stop him from doing dangerous things like crossing the street by himself. I'm sure you could. You seem like you'd be good with your hands, Nick. There are people who paint even though they can't see. I let Nick feel sample plates and taught him how to shape the clay into similar forms. Because he can't see, he kneads the clay while checking the shape over and over with his fingertips. He seems to enjoy the fresh sensation of the clay's texture, coolness, and softness. Nick seemed to keep making things while I was out at my part-time job. When I get home, several pieces are lined up on the cooking sheet. The ceramic pieces were all adorable, even if their shapes were a bit unusual. Wow, you're really good at this. I carefully carried them to the drying shelf, trying not to break them. I kept an eye on how they were drying and fired each one in the oven. As I was doing this, I noticed another odd thing. Oh, the Belle figurine I left here is gone. The figurine of Belle washing his face, which should have been on the desk, had disappeared. I also realized that the rabbit and frog figurines I had put out were missing. When I asked Nick, he said that he might have accidentally broken or thrown them away. I was always carrying them around for reference. I'm sorry. Is that so? I'm really sorry. Because of my blindness, even the cat figurine. I couldn't pursue the matter any further. It's okay. Maybe. I know, some elves took them. I said with a laugh, trying to brush it off. Even with such childish words, Nick seemed reassured. Nick continued his work after that, but I started to feel a clear sense of unease about his words and actions. When I told David about it, he made a surprised face. I'm always away for work or on business trips, he said vaguely, as if he didn't know. Amidst these unsettling days, the time came for Nick's regular checkup. David had left for a business trip in the morning. Nick and I had gotten a little closer through pottery, so today I was going with him. We arrived at the hospital before noon, completed the reception, and waited for our turn in the waiting room. The women at the reception desk seemed to be looking at us and talking about something. No, they might not necessarily be talking about me or Nick. Thinking I was being self-conscious, I opened the pottery magazine I had brought. Eventually, our turn came and Nick's name was called. He went into the examination room with a nurse. However, when I tried to accompany him, the nurse stopped me. I wondered why. It was my first time coming with Nick, so perhaps they were verifying who I was. As I pondered this, I alone was guided in the opposite direction of the examination room and shown to a separate room. Inside, there was a thin doctor sitting in a chair, handing a file folder to a nurse. After the nurse left the room, the doctor looked at me. His name tag read Tom. His narrow eyes stared intently at me, and he opened his mouth without me being able to read his intentions. "How much do you know?" "Huh?" What was he talking about? I stared at Tom, dumbfounded and confused. I thought he meant Nick's eyesight, but something seemed off. "This is my first time accompanying him for a checkup, so I'm not sure what I'm being asked." "I'm sorry. I didn't explain properly. I mean, well." His hesitant response made me grow more suspicious. "What on earth is going on?" "Well, you see." As if startled, he stared past me. I turned around to see David, who was supposed to be on a business trip, standing there with his arms crossed. "Geez, you're as bad at talking as ever." I couldn't hide my surprise at David's exasperated sigh. "David, why are you here?" "I needed to check something with Tom. About Dad." Him mentioning his father made me stop short. What did Tom need to verify about Nick? From David's attitude towards Tom, I could tell they were quite close. Apparently they had been friends since their student days. "I also have something I want to confirm. Mary, can you tell me more about Nick's usual behavior?" When asked about his usual behavior, I described his routine from waking up to going to bed. He can shower, use the bathroom, and eat properly all by himself. He can go to his regular checkups and come back on his own, and at home, he enjoys chatting on his smartphone. As I described Nick's ordinary daily life, Tom nodded in understanding. I also mentioned that Nick had recently started pottery and was immersed in it during the day while I was out. I showed them photos of Nick's pottery that I had taken with my smartphone. His recent works had become more well-shaped, with no distortions. Seeing this, Tom let out a small groan. "Anything else? Especially in Nick's words or actions that seemed odd to you?" Asked this, I pondered for a while. The only thing that came to mind was how he tried to do everything himself despite supposedly being completely blind. It seemed like he was trying to distance himself from me somehow. "I see. Anything else that bothered you?" "Now that you mention it," I remembered. Just a few days ago, some of my pottery pieces had gone missing from the house. When I asked Nick, he said he might have accidentally thrown them away because he couldn't see. But something about that didn't sit right with me. Going back a little further, I recalled the odd feeling I had just before Nick said he wanted to do pottery. "I told him I went to show my work to my pottery teacher. But..." At that time, Nick had asked what kind of plates they were. As if he had seen me making plates before and knew about it. Then David started to speak. "I want you to see this too." As he said this, David showed me his smartphone. On it was a photo of the missing Belle figurine washing its face. Looking closely, there was a price attached, and it seemed to be listed on some sales website. "What? No way! Why?" I stared at the screen in shock. I had no recollection of listing it, so why was it here? Surprise and confusion swirled together, making my head spin. More than anger, I felt a deep sadness welling up inside me. "So Mary, you really didn't know about this website or that the work was being sold online?" David looked at me seriously, and I nodded. "I have no idea about this either. Who on earth would do such a thing?" We'll find out soon. Muttering cryptically, David made a call to somewhere. Tom also watched David, nodding. Not understanding what was going on, I just stared at the two of them. Hello? Is this the police? I was dumbfounded seeing David calling the police. The story goes back 2 days. While on break with a colleague from work, David was introduced to a website specializing in selling cat figurines. He was told there was a figurine they were interested in and asked to take a look. They showed it to me because the design of a cat washing its face is rare. The moment David saw it, he had a gut feeling it was the Belle figurine I had made. When he was shown the seller's information, it said the works were being sold to raise funds for stray cat rescue activities. It also stated that the artist was completely blind, giving David a bad feeling. The artist's name is Nick and he's totally blind. And the familiar-looking figurine. David said there was only one person he could think of who could get their hands on this. It's hard to imagine Mary cooperating. She said she wasn't interested in selling. David seemed to recall the odd feeling I had mentioned too. If I hadn't heard your story, I wouldn't have realized. Dad might not actually be blind. Tom continued David's hesitant words. Just 2 days ago, David contacted me about Nick. He was quite surprised when I said I was in charge of his case. In fact, Tom had doubts about Nick's vision. During examinations, Nick acts as though he can't see. But on the other hand, Tom felt his gait and movements didn't seem like those of a visually impaired person. The nurses had the same impression. I don't want to doubt a patient, but... Tom said this, looking downcast. Just then, there was a sudden commotion coming from the hallway. As we hurried out of the room in a panic, we saw Nick being questioned by 2 police officers who had rushed over. Nick seemed to be shouting something and was in a state of panic. Nick! I tried to run over to him, but David grabbed my arm and stopped me. Immediately after, Nick shook off the officer's hand and ran away at full speed. The waiting room was full of patients, and bumping into them would not end well. But Nick nimbly avoided the waiting room chairs, patients, and nurses. It was as swift as a soccer player slipping past an opponent in front of the goal. As everyone stood dumbfounded, the 2 police officers quickly chased after Nick and caught him in no time. Let me go! I'm blind! His cries rang out in vain, making it evident that Nick could indeed see. The 2 officers stood Nick up and took him away for questioning. Later investigation revealed that Nick had created and operated a fraudulent sales website. On the site, he was selling his own works as well as some of mine. His motive seemed to be money, and the story about raising funds for stray cat rescue was a lie. He confessed that he did it because he couldn't live on his pension alone. After the commotion at the hospital, local media came every day requesting interviews. The story of Nick pretending to be completely blind, even deceiving his family, and selling handmade cat figurines had become a bit of a news item. I'm sorry. I cannot comment on that. I repeated this answer through the doorbell every day. As for Nick, he was given the cold shoulder by the entire neighborhood and wouldn't come out of his bedroom. At a loss, we decided to ask Nick's older brother Ben for help. Ben had previously been in the military and was apparently a strict instructor. He had a very kind personality but also a strong sense of justice, so he was furious about Nick's actions this time. Even though Ben lived in a town about a 3-hour flight away, he arrived with an enraged expression. How pathetic. I'm going to bring him to my house for some strict guidance for a while. He entered the bedroom and grabbed the trembling Nick by the neck. Ben, stop! I don't want to go outside. Nick clung to him, half crying, but was powerless against Ben. Ben simply said, I apologize for the trouble he caused, and left with Nick. Nick had always been intimidated by Ben. He won't be able to do any more bad things now. This will make Dad live an honest life too. David muttered sadly, as if to say this was for the best. David immediately shut down the site Nick had created, but something unexpected was happening online. Today, a colleague told me. Apparently, photos of the site that was supposed to be closed were being spread on social media by others who had seen it. The cats I made were said to have kinder expressions compared to the cat figurines Nick made, and this was becoming a topic of discussion. It seemed the creator's personality came through, and as it gained popularity, the reputation spread further. My colleague said he wants one of Belle's paperweights too. David spoke with a hint of excitement, looking very happy. But the site is closed, and I'm not really keen on online sales. About that, David started speaking energetically. An acquaintance of David's colleague apparently runs a gift shop in this neighborhood. The female shop owner also saw my works on social media and definitely wanted to carry them in her store. But she was having trouble because she couldn't find my contact information. In this neighborhood. You mean that stylish shop on the corner? That's the one. Why don't you go check it out tomorrow? At David's suggestion, I decided to visit the shop right away. The shop owner wore lots of cat accessories, making it clear she was quite a cat lover. I agreed to her offer and decided to have my works displayed in the shop. A few days later, I brought over plates in addition to the paperweights to display. A slight feeling of happiness mixed with anxiety about whether they would actually sell. Often, the pieces would sell out while I was in the process of making more. The sales were just pocket money, but I was still filled with surprise and joy. I decided to donate a portion of it to stray cat rescue activities. I thought that would make Belle happy too. This donation activity led to increased interactions with fellow stray cat rescuers and local artists. My pottery class teacher seems to drop by occasionally too. Every day is fulfilling, and I'm living a very enjoyable life. I'm now called Belle by them. It's embarrassing to be called by my beloved cat's name, but this must be a bond Belle has created for me. Isn't that right, Belle? I gazed at the paperweight of Belle washing her face on the living room table. I'm home. David, who had returned home without me noticing, approached with a big smile. I wonder what happened. Today is our wedding anniversary and the day we first met Belle. As he spoke, David placed the cake box he was holding next to Belle. Ah, that's right. My heart filled with happiness, and I spontaneously hugged David. Belle smiled as she washed her face. I'm taking the house, the savings, and the retirement fund. You can go live in a home. Understood. These were the last words spoken to me by my husband of 35 years on the final day of our marriage. Rather than cherishing the effort I put into raising our children, caring for our parents, and working tirelessly, he chose to cast me aside in the most humiliating way. What was the meaning of my 35 years of dedication? He left all responsibilities to me while he enjoyed nights out. Never once did he express gratitude, as if my efforts were expected. Looking back, I'm amazed at how long I endured this treatment. But now, it's time for me to live my life in my golden years. I thought it was my husband's turn to be miserable. My name is Grace, I'm 60 years old. Working part-time at a food company's factory. My husband's name is Robert, he's 65. We met through a mutual acquaintance. And got married when I was 25, marking 35 years of marriage. Our relationship began with what was then popular group dating, and after several dates, influenced by our friends, we started dating. As we met more and more, we both started to think that if we were to marry anyone, it would be each other. Getting married felt like a natural progression. Starting our life together, I realized Robert had no savings. In the beginning, we lived in a small apartment, with most living expenses covered by me. Robert's low income made me anxious about our future, so I continued working, sometimes unable to manage household chores due to overtime. You're late. I'm hungry already. Did you wait? You could have eaten first. How can I eat when there's nothing to eat? Robert often came home earlier than me, as he rarely worked overtime, yet he never helped with household chores. Isn't it a woman's job to do the housework? We're not in that era anymore. That time was when women were starting to make significant strides in the workforce. The term career woman was becoming common, but Robert insisted that household duties were a woman's job, as if stuck in an outdated mindset. I would have preferred being a housewife if it were financially feasible. Balancing work and home life is what defines the modern woman. Our situation wasn't exactly the stereotype of a henpecked husband, but reflected Robert's tendency to interpret things in a way that suited him. While I was constrained, Robert often went out drinking. If you're going to be late, at least let me know. Quit nagging! It's my time! I can do what I want! His tone grew even harsher when he came home drunk. While I couldn't freely use my own money or time, Robert enjoyed his. I feel like I'm always getting the short end of the stick. Early in our marriage, I was so frustrated that I considered divorce. But when I confided in my mom, she strongly advised against it. I also worried about societal judgment and lacked the courage to leave. Living together meant acknowledging both the good and the bad, I constantly reminded myself. After my husband Robert received his paycheck, he'd either go out for drinks or just enjoy his freedom. He never considered taking on a side job or working overtime. Instead, he'd leave work on time, choosing between heading out for drinks or coming home. When he did come home and found me not there, he'd complain. I hate coming home to an empty house. Seeing the lights off through the window stresses me out. But sometimes I have to work late. I'd respond, "What's the point of you working overtime? You should find a different job." He'd retort. Robert took it upon himself to call my workplace and suggested they let me go. Whether my boss wanted to avoid getting involved in whatever was happening or had already wanted to fire me, I was encouraged to resign. It became uncomfortable to stay, so I left a job that was hard to get in the first place. Now, I was faced with the daunting task of job hunting again. Having already left 2 companies, my resume wasn't passing the initial screenings. In a panic, why not work part-time? I'm working full-time anyway, Robert casually mentioned. I wasn't particularly career-driven, so I didn't cling to my aspirations. However, I was worried if we could manage on Robert's salary alone. So, I took on 2 part-time jobs. One as an early morning cleaner and another as a supermarket cashier. I'd even work overtime at the supermarket on days I knew Robert would be home late. I made sure to be home when Robert was around and worked diligently when he wasn't. I endured years of this routine, convincing myself that Robert needed me. I found his desire to have me home when he returned somewhat endearing at the time. A year into our marriage, I gave birth to our first son. Our apartment is getting too cramped. Yeah, the kid will want his own room when he's older, and he might even want siblings. Around that time, Robert's mom, Karen, who was a divorced single mother, suggested we live together. Probably, she felt lonely after Robert, her only child, left home. It's all positives, right? We won't have to pay rent, Robert said, likely echoing Karen's words. I wanted some time to think it over. Mom's already getting things ready, he pressed, revealing that a room for our son was already being prepared, complete with new wallpaper. I was shocked at how far they had progressed with their plans without me. Wanting to continue working part-time, I agreed, albeit a bit lightly. a decision I would soon regret. Karen seemed to have it out for me, delivering daily doses of sarcasm. It's sad for the child to see his mom work so much. I can't believe this. It wasn't like this in my time, she'd say. Karen had never worked. After her divorce, she relied on her parents to raise Robert. Karen's family was somewhat wealthy, so there was money. Now, it seems she's living off a small inheritance and a meager pension. Though her spending habits seemed a bit extravagant. Her kindness extended to her hobbies and her son and grandson, but never to me. Meals were prepared without considering me, and I was often left behind on outings. I was thankful she looked after my grandson, though. With Karen taking over the household, Robert told me, "You can work full-time now, overtime included." What? Why all of a sudden? I asked, baffled. "Since Mom's here, you can go work," he said. I thought to myself, what a selfish person he is. It was then I realized that when he said he wanted me to stay home, it wasn't because he wanted me there, but rather someone to take care of his needs. I started my mornings by dropping off our child at the childcare center, then heading to work as a temp. Fortunately, Karen was always willing to pick up our grandson, which allowed me to rely on her for the return trips. Being able to work overtime without complaints was a relief. This routine continued for about 10 years until Karen began to act strangely. "Who are you?" "A thief, I guess." "Robert, call the police." "No, it's me, Grace." Karen had developed Alzheimer's disease and saw me as a complete enemy. She increasingly failed to recognize Robert and our son as well. One day, while wandering, she was involved in a traffic accident and became bedridden. "This is your fault. You're responsible for taking care of her," Robert blamed me. "How is it my fault? You shouldn't be working late nights." "But you're the one who said I could work." Our arguments became endless. I considered leaving with our son, but couldn't abandon Karen. Besides, our son loved both Robert and Karen too much for me to separate them. Karen, who never accepted me as family, complained daily while I cared for her. When I confided in Robert, he dismissed it simply. "She has dementia, what can you do?" Eventually, I quit my job and became increasingly isolated. I had hoped Karen might become kinder to me, thinking I was a stranger due to her condition, but that was wishful thinking. She must have inherently disliked me. Yet, she was still an important grandmother to our son. I cared for Karen alone until she passed away. After Karen's death and our son becoming independent, only Robert and I remained. With Robert's retirement coming up next year, I looked forward to traveling together and exploring new places. However, Robert presented me with something shocking. "Mine's already filled out. Just sign and submit it." "A divorce application?" "It's obvious if you look at it. You're really dumb, you know. That's what's been so annoying." I felt as if I'd been punched. It felt like I might collapse right there. "Why? Did I do something to deserve a divorce? If I had to say, I don't want to spend the rest of my life with you." "What do you mean?" Robert looked at me with a scornful smile and dropped a bombshell. "I want to marry someone else." And then there was Robert's mistress. It seems their affair had been going on for years. The mistress was 20 years younger than me. "Even when I was taking care of Mom and raising our child, you were cheating?" "That's about right." The anger inside me was about to explode. While I endured Karen's harsh words, took care of our child, and suffered loneliness all by myself, Robert was out having fun with his mistress. I wish I never knew this. "You've been deceiving me all along. I'll never forgive you." "And what are you going to do about it?" "Like you could do anything." Robert taunted me with a smirk. "So, you're divorcing me to be with her?" "That's right. She's much younger than you." "Understood. I'll sign the divorce papers. But just so you know, I'll be seeking compensation from both of you. Fine by me. I'll pay whatever amount. I've got Mom's inheritance, after all. Oh, but just so you know, I'm not splitting any property with you. I took a moment to think. I had some savings of my own, which I didn't want Robert or his mistress to get their hands on. Okay, I'll settle for the compensation. In return, we don't split my assets either. Robert burst out laughing at that. Your money isn't worth much anyway. I don't need it. We signed the documents in the presence of lawyers, agreeing not to pursue a division of property but to settle on a compensation claim. I received $30,000, which seemed to be paid out in a lump sum from Karen's estate. He probably wanted to start his new life with his mistress as quickly as possible, resolving any messy ties with money. After the lawyer left, I'm taking the house, the savings, and the retirement funds. You can go live in a home, Robert said. And so, I did end up moving into a facility. Not because Robert told me to, but because it seemed like a more enjoyable way to spend my retirement. The house was originally Robert's family home, and I had nowhere else to live. My sister and her husband were living in my family home, and I didn't want to impose on my son and his wife. I knew Robert had no savings, so dividing property would have been pointless. I preferred to get the divorce over with quickly and was confident I could make it on my own from now on. Robert was the heir to Karen's estate, and the compensation was enough for me. Months later, Robert showed up at the facility, though I hadn't given him my current address. He wasn't supposed to know I had moved into the facility. He must have used some agency to find me. I wondered what he could possibly want after all this time. There were other residents at the facility, so I asked him to wait on the outdoor terrace. Seeing Robert sitting there, looking around, I felt a sense of pity. What had I ever seen in this man to marry him? It was a mystery even to myself. Sorry to keep you waiting. What do you want? What's all this about? Robert confronted me without a greeting, clearly shocked. I played dumb, knowing full well why he was surprised. Why are you here all of a sudden? How did you find me? It took me forever to track you down since you wouldn't contact me. You didn't tell our son either, did you? He had no idea. I didn't want to bother him, as he has his own family now. But that doesn't answer my question. How did you find out about this place? I hired a detective. When I mentioned I needed to contact you about the compensation, they found you. Having an ex-husband is quite handy. So, he had gone through an agency after all. Which detective agency was it? I was furious at the breach of privacy but kept my cool. More importantly, how can someone like you afford to stay in such a luxurious facility? That was what Robert was astonished about. After our divorce, I had moved into a high-end facility that we had once considered for our retirement. It wasn't your typical nursing home, but more of a luxury apartment complex with an attached hospital. There was also a dining hall run by a nutritionist, and I spent my days enjoying the company of other residents and helpers. You could be on your own if you wished, and someone would check on each room daily to ensure no one had fallen. Each room was equipped with an emergency call button for immediate assistance. I heard this place costs $1 million? How do you have that kind of money? Actually, I've been investing for the past 35 years, ever since we got married. I wanted to ensure we could enjoy our retirement together. I had been laid off during a recession and struggled to find a new job, which drained my savings and filled me with anxiety. Understanding the unpredictability of life, I realized that saving money wasn't enough and started learning about investments. I didn't want to seem greedy, so I never told Robert, whom I was dating at the time. I began investing modestly. After we got married, my desire for us to enjoy good food and travel in our retirement grew stronger, prompting me to invest more seriously. Since we both worked, I gradually invested my earnings. sacrificing outings with friends, delicious meals, shopping, and vacations, putting all my disposable income into investments. After 35 years of consistent investing, I amassed a significant fortune. Partly because I started right when the economy was down. When I shared this, Robert claimed, "Then that money is mine too." I had anticipated he would say something like that. "Sorry, but you have no claim to my money." "Why not? I'm your ex-husband. It should be part of my assets too." "You renounced any claim to my assets in front of our lawyers. Have you forgotten already?" "Damn, that's why you insisted on a lawyer. You tricked me." "Who's been deceiving whom all along?" Robert's face twisted in frustration. Realizing this conversation was a waste of time, I urged him to leave. "No way. I'm not leaving. I'll live here too." I was speechless with disbelief. Shortly after, a security guard arrived, prompted by another resident who noticed my distress and escorted Robert out. Due to his harassing behavior, Robert was banned from the facility and added to the blacklist. Curious about his persistence, I contacted our son, who revealed that Robert was in debt. After our divorce, Robert planned to marry his mistress. However, she became furious upon learning about the compensation he paid me. To appease her, Robert lavished her with gifts. But she eventually left him for a younger man without marrying him. "Are you dumping me after all I've spent on you?" It was too late for regrets. The mistress had moved on, losing interest in a now penniless Robert. It turns out she was using Robert as a convenient source of money, likely having always preferred the younger man. I couldn't believe a woman 20 years younger would seriously consider marrying someone like Robert. It seems he was the only one who truly believed in his affair turning into marriage, which must have been a huge shock to him. After donating all of his inheritance to his mistress and accumulating debt, Robert ended up alone in a house that was over 70 years old. The house was in bad shape, with many parts broken and no money for repairs. He now lives alone in a leaky home. My son expressed no interest in helping him. Recently, a community worker visited, asking Robert to at least repair the exterior walls because it was affecting the neighboring house. Robert's angry outburst over this request led to a police incident. My son had to pick up his father from the police station, where he told Robert they were through. "You're abandoning me too?" Robert cried, clinging to his son, who shook him off. Discarded by his son, I thought how pitiful Robert was. After the incident with the police, he became a pariah in the neighborhood, spending his weekends indoors. After telling me about Robert's current situation, my son asked me to keep in touch occasionally. I was touched that he cared. Sometime after talking to my son, I received a call from Robert. Ignoring it, he then called the facility directly. Such persistence. The staff were worried for me. I decided to answer just once. "I just need a little money." "I refuse." "Don't you have a pension?" Robert was supposed to have recently retired, so his claim of having no money seemed like a lie. "I didn't get anything." "Don't lie. You received a pension, didn't you?" "I got fired just before retirement because of the affair." Turns out, Robert was fired just short of retirement. Apparently, his mistress was a co-worker. After breaking up, Robert's stalking scared her into reporting him to their employer. Ultimately, his affair was exposed, leading to his dismissal without a pension. His stalking and the resulting police involvement also became a problem. I felt no sympathy for his story. I asked the facility staff to call the police if he contacted again. When Robert realized he couldn't reach me by phone, he resorted to sending letters. The letter began with, "I want to see you again. I'm lonely." But towards the end, "I need some money." The content changed to things like that. I think he's struggling. There was a time I inadvertently laughed. I forgot which letter it was, but the ink was slightly smeared. It looked like it was from tears, but I suspect it was just water. I wondered what the point of such a performance was. Truly, it must be hard for him. The letters stopped after about a year when I didn't respond. Years passed, and I had completely forgotten about Robert. Then one day, while I was shopping, a man in dirty clothes, emitting a slight odor, approached me. It was undoubtedly Robert, now thin with almost entirely white hair and a bushy beard. "Isn't that Grace?" I was shocked by how much he had changed. "I've finally found you. Let's start over. You're all I have." Feeling frightened as Robert grabbed my hand, he insisted. "It's me, Robert. You recognize me, right?" "I do, but we are strangers now. Goodbye." As I tried to leave, Robert blocked my path, looking at me with desperate eyes, then suddenly begged, "Please, come back home. I don't want to be alone in my old age. You were the one who drove me away. Have you forgotten?" "I'm apologizing, aren't I?" "Sorry isn't enough. I've moved on. You should too." Despite my attempts to ignore him, Robert kept chasing me, repeatedly bowing his head. "We're divorced, Robert. Stop this." "I was wrong. You were the most important thing to me. I've realized that now." "It's too late." As I tried to distance myself, Robert grabbed my arm. Then, "Could you let go of her, please?" "Who are you?" "This is my husband." "What?" I had remarried. My new husband's name is Matthew. 2 years my senior. We got close in the same facility where we met. It was Matthew who had called security when Robert visited. This was shared with me by another resident, and I was drawn to their considerate and kind nature. We naturally spent more time together and decided to marry. Despite wondering if it was odd to remarry at our age, we chose happiness for our final chapter. Matthew pulled Robert away from me. "You remarried?" "Yes. So please leave me alone." "So that's how it is." Robert was visibly shaken. I was worried he might lash out at Matthew in anger, but he had no energy left. Instead, he collapsed, crying on the spot. "Please stop. It's embarrassing." "Shut up. Don't bother me," Robert cried unabashedly, as onlookers watched from afar. I thought it was a pitiful sight. A grown man, crouched down on the street, crying. Is this something a person can do without shame? Or perhaps, am I being tested? "Grace, let's go." "Yes." Encouraged by Matthew, I left the scene behind. Since then, Robert has not appeared before me again. According to my son, Robert still lives in the same old, unrepaired house, unable to properly take care of household chores and accumulating garbage to the point of generating complaints for the smell. My son has been inconvenienced by repeated contacts every time there's a complaint. Despite attempts to reason with him, my son finally lost his patience. In front of a city official, "He's not my son," Robert declared. Following that, attempts to contact my son ceased when Robert reacted angrily to them. It seems the authorities have also given up, deeming any effort futile. Truly, Robert has become a neighborhood nuisance. However, that's no longer my concern. Ultimately, abandoned by everyone, Robert lives in isolation. "If only I hadn't started that affair," my son mentioned hearing Robert say. But to me, it's not about the affair. It's the price of living selfishly, without regard for others, now coming back to haunt him. It's his responsibility. Humans may be prone to making regrettable decisions, but continuing without reflection for over 70 years is merely pitiful. Robert will likely never realize this, having destroyed his own future. The task of repairing it falls to him, though he may lack the strength to do so. I hope he faces his actions and lives on. I'm thankful to Robert. Had I continued to rely on him, my later years would have been disastrous. His decision to divorce because of his affair allowed me to live my life. I've started to communicate more frequently with my son. It was a turning point when Emily, my son's wife, who mediated between us, said, "Please don't worry about it." That moment made me realize how much of my life was spent overly accommodating others. I had distanced myself from my adult son to avoid burdening him. Shocked when he expressed his dislike for his grandmother and father from childhood. Aware of the mistreatment and infidelity, I've resolved to live the rest of my life without such undue consideration. Now, my son's family and grandchildren visit, allowing us to make up for lost time in conversation. My son seems a bit shy, but it's strange how he can talk naturally when his wife and grandchildren are around. He has accepted Matthew, and to my grandchildren, Matthew is like a real grandfather. Currently, Matthew and I enjoy our time in the facility, surrounded by friends and content. My priority is health, hoping for a long life. Joanna, it's about Walton's memorial dinner, but I doubt anyone will show up. It's my wedding day, so everyone prefers a celebration. What do you mean? My Sael, Carolina, intentionally set her wedding date to coincide with the anniversary of our grandson's passing, a year after his death. Come on, Joanna, you've become so forgetful without Walton that you can't even understand English anymore. I was infuriated by Carolina's unapologetic demeanor. I was fed up with Carolina's manipulative words and actions, and my husband, Darren, seemed indifferent. Well, for me, seeing my sister in her wedding dress is more important, so you can go to the memorial dinner alone. Faced with Carolina and Darren's cold attitudes, I came up with a plan. All right, I'll consider what you said. Today, after 25 years as a housewife, Joanna, I saw a text from Darren and felt down again. Staying over there again? I muttered to myself. Darren works at his father's company and is so busy that he often stays at his family home near the company instead of our house. It was foolish of me to hope he might come home early today, since it's my birthday. I sighed while preparing an unusually lavish dinner. Maybe he's just really busy. I talked to the sky, trying to convince myself. Though we met through a friend's introduction, Darren has always prioritized his family home over me. I tried to dismiss the thought that my in-laws must have said something, prompted by Darren's frequent, "I'll be staying at my parents' house." I want to trust Darren, but even on the rare days he is home, we are invariably interrupted by calls from his sister, Carolina, summoning him frequently. Carolina, Darren's sister, is 17 years younger than him and, according to him, indescribably cute. Darren would always tell me, "I'll definitely spend my next day off with you and the kids," a promise that never materialized, making me feel like Carolina was disrupting our family life. As I was about to prepare dinner, my motivation drained, staring at a carrot when my son, Morris, called. "Mom? Happy birthday!" Morris, thank you. Morris's casual words warmed my heart, and I struggled to hold back tears. Mom, is it like that again today? Morris, who married at 23 and now lives with his wife, Rothy, has known since childhood that Darren seldom comes home. Seeing me clearly downcast because Darren hasn't come home, Morris, who grew up witnessing this, still worries about me and calls, even now that he's grown. Especially today, on my birthday, when he learned Darren wouldn't be coming home again, Morris said with an unusually serious tone. "Mom, you must be feeling lonely without Dad, right?" "Yes, I am." "How about we come to live with you?" "What?" I was thrilled by Morris's suggestion, but worried that Rothy might not agree. I casually mentioned it to Rothy before, and she seemed happy about it. Morris, sensing my anxiety, responded with a clear and cheerful voice. Really? Rothy's okay with it? Of course. She likes the food you make. She said she'd be happy to eat it every day. Thank you. Then, I'll prepare your room and ask Dad if it's okay. I usually expected Darren to ignore this, but I felt like I received a birthday present from Morris, thinking he might listen this time. A ray of sunshine seemed to break through my gloom. Later, Morris and Rothy moved into our house. Even on the day they moved in, Darren didn't come home, but I was so happy they were here that I hardly minded. When I put effort into cooking, both Morris and, of course, Rothy were happy, making our meals always lively and enjoyable. Though Darren rarely came home, their presence meant I didn't feel lonely and enjoyed peaceful days. Then one day, Rothy felt unwell and decided to go to the hospital. It had been 4 months since they moved in with us, and she had never been seriously sick or injured before, so I was filled with anxiety. Morris's face, tense despite saying it'll be okay as he left for the hospital with Rothy, stuck in my mind. I tried to shake off the bad feeling by putting more energy into my chores than usual. However, my anxiety soon vanished. Mom! While I was hanging laundry on the balcony, Morris was coming home, waving at me with the biggest smile. Welcome back, both of you. How did it go? Rothy smiled and gave me a cute okay sign, gently stroking her belly. Could it be? Yes. I'm pregnant. Wow. Congratulations. I felt so full of warmth and joy, as if every cell in my body was trembling with happiness. Leaving the laundry halfway done, I went out to them. Mom, you came out for us? Of course, I'm thrilled just thinking about our first grandchild. I was told it would be difficult for me to get pregnant, so I'm really happy. Rothy lovingly placed her hand on her belly. Rothy, congratulations. Feel free to lean on me as much as you need. Thank you. From that day on, it was a whirlwind of activity. We had to gather everything needed for Rothy and the baby, organize the house, and there was plenty to do. Darren would occasionally join me for shopping, but inevitably, if Carolina called, he'd make excuses and head back to his family home, no matter where we were. Rothy's belly grew noticeably, but 3 months before her due date, something went wrong. Rothy, are you okay? Morris called out desperately, but seeing Rothy in so much pain, he decided to call an ambulance. Soon after, the ambulance arrived, and Rothy was carried away on a stretcher. I'll go with Rothy, so could you, Mom, come later, please? Of course, I'll gather what's needed and take a taxi. Morris nodded briefly, then got into the ambulance with Rothy, heading to the hospital. I need to hurry, too. I packed a bag with essentials for Rothy's imminent birth. I'll call Dad, see if I can get the day off work. Darren, standing worried, said something unusual, indicating his concern. Really? You can do that? Yeah. It's an emergency with our first grandchild, no time to work. Darren quickly made the call and was easily excused. While Darren was on the phone, I arranged a taxi and locked up the house. We arrived at the hospital, and heading to Morris, we heard, Rothy will have a cesarean section. What should I do? I'm really anxious. If you're not strong, Morris, Rothy will feel your anxiety. You're right. I'm going to be a dad. How long had it been since Rothy entered the operating room? The red in surgery sign seemed to loom for hours. It's taking a long time. Darren started shaking his knees intensely, almost as if to say he took off work for this. Rothy is fighting hard. Yes, and if you look so worried, the baby will be startled when born. With a furrowed brow, Darren's irritation grew, and he silently went somewhere. he went to make a call. Yes. It was clear to us that despite taking time off to be here, Darren's frustration with the situation led him to call Carolina. As Morris and I grew increasingly anxious, Darren returned with a slightly relieved expression, glanced at the operating room, but sat down silently on the bench. "Rothy," Morris murmured with a mix of worry and anxiety. "I'm worried about Rothy and the baby. It's been so long." "Yes, I didn't have a cesarean, so I'm not sure. It's worrying." In the heavy atmosphere, the operating room door finally opened, and the doctor came out. "Sorry to keep you waiting. Both mother and child are safe." "Great, my precious time was wasted," Darren complained but seemed concerned about the situation inside. Afterward, a nurse came out to speak with us. "If you don't mind looking through the glass, you can see how they both are." "Through the glass?" At Morris's puzzled voice, the nurse made a complicated face and led us over. Beyond the guided glass, Rothy appeared to be sleeping exhaustedly. And as for the baby, it was connected to tubes, covered in some kind of case. "That child is our first grandchild." Tears spilled from Darren's eyes, moved by the sight of the small baby fighting to live despite its frailty. "Rothy and the baby are really okay, right?" Morris desperately asked the nurse. "Yes, but the baby weighs about 28 ounces and is very small, so it's in a critical situation needing to be connected to tubes for a while." The joy of the baby's birth was short-lived as Morris and I were shaken by a wave of anxiety. "We have to send them all the strength we can." I forced a cheerful voice and placed my hands on Morris and Darren's backs. "Yeah." Darren nodded with a troubled face and quietly left the hospital. Back home, Darren began rummaging through a drawer. "The baby is a boy, right?" "Yes, that's right." "What are you looking for?" That thing. Finally finding what he was looking for, Darren looked pleased with himself. "Now that the baby is born, we need to give him a name." "You're naming him?" "Of course. He carries my blood." Darren spread out a notebook, with Morris standing silently beside him, resigned that his words would be futile. Darren, oblivious to Morris, was serious as he faced the notebook. "He overcame a difficult birth. Let's name him Walton, hoping he leads a calm life." Darren, surprisingly serious about the name, slowly moved the pen across the paper. Looking at the notebook with Walton written on it, Darren said with satisfaction, "How about that? It's a good name, isn't it?" "Yes, thank you." I was hopeful, seeing Darren's happy demeanor, that maybe he would start paying more attention to the family. However, there was one significant issue. Walton was too small to be discharged, and for a while, we were not allowed to meet him directly. Eventually, we were allowed to visit Rothy, so we went to tell her the baby's name. "Rothy, how are you feeling?" "Dad named the baby." "I'm okay. Thank you." "What name did he choose?" Rothy turned her head towards Darren with effort. "Walton. It's a good name, isn't it?" Darren proudly said, spreading out the notebook with Walton handwritten on it. "What a beautiful name. I'm so happy. Thank you." Even as she spoke, Rothy seemed unusually downcast, her face shadowed with gloom. I thought maybe the hospital life had worn her out, and considered leaving her be, but her expression was so troubled I had to ask. "Rothy, are you okay? You look so down." "Joanna." Rothy looked at me with tears brimming in her eyes, and I knew something was wrong. "There's something I need to tell also to Morris and Darren." Morris and Darren exchanged glances and then came closer to me. "The thing is, we've been told Walton has a congenital disorder." "What? No way." But a disorder doesn't have to mean something serious. Rothy, unable to hold back her tears any longer, trembled as she spoke. The thing is, it seems Walton doesn't have long to live. Not long to live. I unwittingly repeated Rothy's unexpected words. What do we do? A mix of fear and joy, sorrow, and happiness swirled together, creating a heavy atmosphere. Tears began to stream down Rothy's face as the tension broke. Rothy. Walton. Moved by the moment, Morris and I also began to cry, and eventually, we all cried until we had no tears left. After a good cry, Rothy, perhaps slightly toughened by becoming a mom, slowly began to speak. I want to create as many happy memories for Walton as possible. Yeah, let's spend every possible minute with Walton. Rothy, feeling a bit better, nodded and smiled. Half a year later, Rothy and Walton were discharged and came home. During that time, Darren stayed at his family home less than before, and we all prepared to welcome Rothy and Walton. We went out to places Rothy and Morris wanted to visit, adjusting to Rothy and Walton's health. Darren sometimes joined us, and other times he prioritized Carolina, but we focused on putting Walton first, thinking it was a bonus if Darren came along. Walton, who couldn't speak yet but whose expressions became increasingly lively, was adorable, and we showered him with love. After Walton could no longer travel, we spent time walking, sunbathing in the park, and he was adored by our neighbors. However, the joyful time flew by, and Walton passed away at just 3 years old. Rothy, looking at the sky as if to see her son again, murmured, Walton, it was short, but I enjoyed our time together. Morris, too, looked up at the sky, tears rolling down his cheeks. I was filled with sorrow and didn't think I could move on quickly, but Darren soon returned to prioritizing Carolina and decreased his visits home. The days seemed colorless, as if a hole had been punched in my heart. Though we had no regrets for being there for Walton till the end, the emptiness was heavy. As days swiftly passed, we were soon approaching Walton's memorial dinner. It's almost time for Walton's memorial dinner. Rothy spoke to Walton's photo with a prayer in her heart. We should share lots of memories of Walton. That's a great idea. We need to invite the neighbors who loved Walton. As we talked, Darren, unusually at home on his day off, joined the conversation. When is it? Well, Walton's anniversary is next month on the 14th, so that's our first choice if the venue is available. I see. After confirming, Darren got ready and left the house. We exchanged puzzled glances, but Darren didn't return that day. The next day, I was busy arranging the memorial dinner, securing the venue, and ordering what we needed. I was about to call relatives and acquaintances when Carolina called. Joanna? It's Walton's memorial dinner, but I doubt anyone will show up. It's my wedding day, so everyone prefers a celebration. What do you mean? Come on, Joanna, have you become so forgetful without Walton that you can't even understand English anymore? Carolina was clearly mocking me. So, I'm having my wedding on Walton's anniversary. How do you even know the date? I asked, trying to keep my cool. Obviously, bro told me. My anger rose at Carolina's unapologetic attitude. Why would you do that? Whether it's his wife or grandson, I don't care. It's punishment for taking my bro away from me. He always spoils me. Carolina said bluntly and hung up unilaterally. I was left dumbfounded, holding the phone for a while. Then, Morris and Rothy came in. Mom, you look upset. What happened? Snapped back to reality by Morris's words, I hesitated to tell them about Carolina. Is it about Dad again? Just as Morris asked, looking into my face, Darren came back home, right on cue. Feeling a sense of duty, I immediately called out to Darren. "We need to talk right now." "What? Can't I have a moment of peace?" Ignoring Darren's complaints, I got straight to the point. "Carolina's wedding is on the same day as Walton's memorial dinner." "What?" "No way." In front of a surprised Morris and a confused Rothy, Darren responded indifferently. "Yeah, seeing my sister in her wedding dress is more important, so you can go to the memorial dinner by yourself." "Dad, are you serious? Don't you care about Walton at all?" Morris trembled with anger, and Rothy started crying from shock. "Quite bold words towards your father." Naturally, as her brother, I'd rather celebrate my cute Carolina than mourn a child who won't come back. Darren began saying outrageous things, but an idea crossed my mind, and I forced myself to suppress my emotions to intervene in their conversation. "All right, I'll consider what you said." Morris and Rothy looked at me with their mouths agape as if their jaws would drop, but I nodded reassuringly, and they seemed to understand. On the day of the wedding, we arrived at the hotel venue. Since we had proceeded with the memorial dinner plans without Darren, he assumed he'd be the only one attending the wedding and sat with the bride's side. We were in mourning attire, standing out a bit, but we weren't breaking any wedding rules, so we remained dignified. "Huh?" Darren looked puzzled to see us. "Actually, we wanted to see Carolina in her wedding dress too. We missed the invitation, so we asked your parents." "Figures, right?" Despite his words, Darren seemed satisfied, smiling contentedly. As the wedding began, Carolina, dressed in a pure white wedding gown, entered the venue and was surprised to see us. However, she couldn't interrupt the ceremony, especially in front of so many guests, and couldn't say anything, glaring at us in a way unbecoming of a bride throughout the ceremony. The ceremony ended peacefully, and we were there as the bride and groom and their families bid farewell to the attendees. As we were saying goodbye, a person recognized Morris and Rothy. "You're Walton's parents, aren't you?" "Dr. Trenton." The person who approached us was Walton's attending physician, who of course knew that today was Walton's anniversary. "We really appreciated everything you did." Rothy, Morris, and I hugged Dr. Trenton. "No, Walton was very brave until the end." "It's been exactly a year today." Dr. Trenton hinted something, but we quickly understood what he meant. The groom, Robert, noticing the last attendees weren't moving, came over. "What's going on, Trenton?" "Robert." Trenton looked troubled, glancing between Robert and us. "Do you two know each other?" "Yes. Robert is a junior colleague of mine." Trenton scratched his cheek, looking unsure of what to do. "I've been wondering, what is your relationship with Carolina?" Robert asked us, puzzled why we were sitting on the bride's side despite it being our first meeting and our mourning attire. "Carolina is my husband's sister, and this is my son, Morris, and his wife, Rothy." "I see. And how did you come to know Trenton?" Robert asked with genuine curiosity. "Actually, we had a child with a congenital disorder. Dr. Trenton took care of him." Rothy answered, and Trenton nodded solemnly. "Walton, our child, passed away last year and went to heaven." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Today is Walton's anniversary, isn't it?" Such an important day coincided. I answered clearly, thinking Trenton's point was very valid. "The bride chose this day for her wedding, knowing it was Walton's anniversary." "That's..." "Carolina insisted on this day, saying she wanted it no matter what." "Was that on purpose?" "She said she loved children." Robert looked incredulous, and after conveying something to Carolina and Darren, who were happily chatting, Carolina and Darren approached us with Robert. "What's this?" "I was just getting compliments from Bro on how beautiful I look." Carolina snapped at Robert, oblivious to the tense atmosphere between us. You insisted on having the wedding today, right? And you said you loved children. Yet, you knew it was Joanna's grandson's anniversary and still chose this day? Carolina's face went pale, but she desperately tried to cover up. I didn't know such a thing. It must be a coincidence, or you're lying. Carolina's behavior was suspicious. Darren nodded along, but Robert, faced with Trenton's and our denial, clenched his lips and raised his voice. Is that what a person does? Don't you know what's important? I'll have to reconsider the marriage. At Robert's declaration, Carolina's complexion grew even paler, and she started to rant as her lie was exposed. Why are you even here? It's all your fault. Weren't you supposed to be lonely at your memorial dinner? Carolina approached me with such force that I thought she might grab me, and continued her tirade. I'm the happy bride. It's absurd for you gloomy people to be here uninvited. Her loud voice echoed through the spacious venue, attracting the attention of Carolina and Darren's father, Owen, and mother, Teresa, who hurried over. I was the one who let Joanna and her family in. It was an apology for my foolish daughter and son's behavior that I asked them to attend. Dad, why would you do that? That's too much. Carolina screamed, her fury unabated. If you don't understand why, then we're done with you. Darren too. What? What did I do? I haven't done anything wrong, right? And why am I being disowned? Owen, realizing his children were heartless like cyborgs, sighed deeply. You've always said you wanted to live on your own. Reset everything and start over as a new individual. Facing abandonment by their own father, Darren and Carolina lost the will to argue and fell to their knees. Unknown to many, the hotel where Carolina had her wedding was the same one Joanna and her family had visited for memorable trips with Walton. I had informed the hotel from the planning stages and had first explained the situation to Owen. With Owen's understanding and cooperation, after Carolina's wedding, we invited acquaintances to the same place for a memorial dinner, making it possible to attend both the wedding and the memorial dinner. When I explained to Owen, I was anxious about whether he would believe me, but Owen and the relatives were already disappointed with Carolina's behavior and Darren's patheticness, and they willingly helped. Afterward, Carolina divorced, and soon my divorce with Darren was finalized, and Darren left the house. Having cut ties with Owen, both lost their jobs and homes, and I'm not sure how they're managing now while paying compensation from the divorce trial. Considering the hurt they caused not only to Walton but also to Morris and Rothy, and their abusive words and past actions, I honestly feel they got what they deserved. Morris, Rothy, and I, watched over by Walton's smiling face, have come to live peacefully as if the storm had passed. And with the bad ties cut off, good fortune came our way. Mom! Today, Rothy, who felt something odd in her stomach and went to the hospital with Morris, returned home with beaming smiles. Actually, we're expecting our second baby. With my hands raised in joy, Morris and Rothy exchanged deeply moved glances. Soon, Walton will have a little brother. Suddenly, my parents appeared and started knocking on the car window. Dad, did someone ask you for something? Well, what could that be? You're always so stubborn. Just go and convince your husband, James. Say the chairman should be William because it's better for the company and step down. Or else. So, they've teamed up with my in-laws to knock James off the chairman's seat. And then I noticed, in Mom's hand was something like a crowbar. She swung it high and crash, the window shattered. I was stunned for a while when I heard that a suicide note was found in James's car, who had fallen off a cliff. Then, a week after the car was found, an envelope arrived with a specific delivery date. James? I hurriedly received the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. And a key. Read this without our parents finding out. Of course, I knew that. But he probably wanted to write it that way. This is something I wrote in advance, in case something happened. If I'm there when you receive it, just laugh and give it back to me. But if I'm not there, please, Linda, take what's stored in this locker and flee to your Uncle Richard's place immediately. Susan, my sister-in-law who was reading it with me, and I exchanged glances. And then we immediately grabbed the essentials and ran to Richard's house, my husband's uncle. To protect ourselves and our children, and to let both our parents know what they had done. My name is Linda, 34 years old. I'd like to say I'm just an ordinary housewife, but that was only true until a week ago. Now, I'm a widow with 2 children. James took his own life. That's the most likely possibility, I was told. His car had fallen off a cliff. And a suicide note was found in the dashboard. I can't believe it, I won't believe it. Because it's true. There's no reason for James to take his own life. By himself. Rather. James and I met at our workplace. A real estate resort hotel, the place I had always wanted to work. As a child, I was captivated by a large, beautiful hotel I visited at the invitation of my parents' acquaintance. I chose a university that would teach me important things for the tourism industry, and even my part-time jobs during my student years were behind the scenes at nearby hotels. And finally, I got a job at the resort hotel I had always dreamed of. It was a place known for its strict employee training, and I almost gave up early on. The reason I was able to keep going was thanks to a colleague at that time. People quit one after another, unable to withstand it, but someone was watching over me, the one who remained. That person was James, who later became my husband. We dated for 2 years before getting married. But I was surprised by a fact I learned at that time. James was the nephew of the chairman of this real estate group. He was supposed to become a part of the group's upper echelon eventually, but at that time, he was still working as a resort hotel employee. After our marriage, James moved from the hotel to the real estate side and started showing his face at his uncle's, the chairman's, office. Originally, this group was just a local real estate business, but it grew significantly after the war. The current chairman is the second since the group was formed, and it's said that Richard's skills played a major role in its growth. During the good times, he convinced his parents, so they suffered less when the economy turned bad. Then they started developing resorts, and that too was steadily advanced. But things started getting fishy around Richard when he fell ill last year. And that was because Richard had no direct heir. That's when Richard appointed James as his successor. And that decision shortened James's life. I couldn't quite come to terms with the news from the police that James had died. In the midst of that, my in-laws kept calling. Linda, what happened to James was something terrible. Something terrible? Is that how these people summarize their own son's situation? Hey, Linda, it's going to be tough on your own, right? Come and live at our house. That's right. With James gone, you're going to have financial difficulties, right? William and Jessica, my father-in-law and mother-in-law, took turns speaking such words to me. Feeling irritated, I responded, I can't think about the future right now. And with that, I hung up the phone. What now? I thought. After all, I had only met these in-laws twice. First time, to announce our marriage, and the second time was our wedding day. They never even showed their faces when our son and daughter were born. Yes, James had always avoided his parents, my in-laws. He had harbored distrust towards them since our marriage, saying to me, "Those people are scum who never even try to work for themselves." James's parents currently hold certain posts within the Smith Real Estate Group. But that's just to keep them from doing anything. James had explained to me. He said they were completely different from the capable Richard, and everything they did turned out to be a detriment to the group. So they're given nominal positions just to keep them from messing up. Just going on inspections, which are basically just vacations, he said. Didn't they take you on those trips, letting you see various places? James scoffed at the thought. Me and Susan were always left behind in our big house. James had a sister named Susan. Susan married a man with no connections to the group and lived in the city where he worked. Robert, Susan's husband and James's brother-in-law, got along strangely well with James. He would go out of his way to visit James when he was nearby for work. Susan would be like, "I'm jealous of James," seeing how close they were. Yes, the two siblings got along well. And both had a strained relationship with their parents. But I'm fine with it. Once I got married and moved away, I didn't care about them anymore. Susan said nonchalantly. But James is involved with the group. And that means? Our parents know they're the failures of the group, so they hate seeing James do well. Is that how it is? At our house, yes. But your parents are different, right? Not at all. Yes. My relationship with my parents was not good either. No, it was fine when I was a child. As their only daughter, I thought they loved me. But their true nature emerged when I was in college. Quit college and come back home. That was the sudden message I received. It was for a marriage proposal. They wanted to make me, a 20-year-old at the most, come back home for that reason. Apparently, Thomas, the son of a well-known local figure, had taken a liking to me when he returned home. I insist on having her as my wife. To fulfill Thomas's spoiled wish, my parents were willing to do it for their own benefit. We've raised you so far, so you should show filial piety towards us, right? I felt my image of my parents shatter. They had raised me, their daughter, just for the sake of a return. Realizing this, I firmly refused to return home. Then, they stopped sending me money for education and living expenses. They thought that would make me come back. But I stubbornly refused to return. I consulted with my professor and found a way to continue my studies without being taken back by my parents. It was a struggle until I graduated. I managed to cover my educational expenses through scholarships. The problem was living expenses. I moved out of my secure one-room apartment, sold unused furniture, and moved into an older apartment. My life revolved around university, part-time jobs, and job hunting. I only went back to my room to sleep. As a result, this part-time job experience led to employment and meeting James. And my parents were oddly happy about my marriage to James. Aren't they good parents? Comparing them to his own, James said with a wry smile. No. They did their research. They found out that you are the nephew of the chairman of the real estate group. You're kidding. James couldn't believe it for a while. But when my parents visited for the births of our son Daniel and our daughter Mary, James also realized they were not so different from his own parents. After all, my parents said, "Now that you have 2 kids, your future is secure. Yes, it'll make our lives easier too." James's smile twisted slightly at that moment. Both James and I were sensitive to the words of parents. Especially James, who knew about my struggles during college. Were they a bit too relaxed, or did they just take it for granted? Either way, their words were clearly meant to mooch off of us and our kids in the future. After that, James started to be wary of them too. Distant in-laws, parents trying too hard to make contact. While being cautious of both, I continued raising our children. Fortunately, with James' current position and salary, we could afford a housekeeper and a sitter. We don't have trustworthy relatives, but we've managed on our own. But last year, things changed. Richard fell ill. Richard, in his 60s, who always kept fit and seemed immune to sickness, suddenly faced a health crisis. He was in good shape, with no blood pressure issues that I knew of. But an impact he suffered on his head when he was young had now formed a hematoma, pressing on his brain. Emergency surgery saved him, and he was on a good path to recovery with no lasting effects. However, this incident shook the group as Richard hadn't named a successor. Richard himself thought, I can still keep going. That's probably why he hadn't decided yet. But illness strikes unexpectedly. Once you know that, you have to think about a successor. And here's where the problem arose, the choice of who it would be. Richard and his wife had no children. No biological or adopted child was there at that time. So, Richard, while recuperating, nominated James. It seemed a reasonable choice within the group. Most senior employees knew that James was being trained and educated within the group. But some just couldn't accept it. The in-laws. Wait a minute, Richard. Isn't he still too young? Aren't I the closest one to you, Richard? Why are you overlooking William for James? They apparently confronted Richard while he was recuperating. Richard retorted sharply. If I leave it to William and the others, the group will be ruined. And he explained clearly why he chose James. But then, their focus shifted to James. Step down, say you're too young and want your parents to take over. Those were their words. It was a threat, clear and simple. Initially, it was, please. But gradually it turned into, do something about it, or else. Their tone changed. This is bad. What do you mean? They might harm me, you, and our kids if we let them be. Really? I initially wondered if they would go that far. They would, James said. I never thought of them as my parents. And they probably don't think of us siblings as their children. No, that's not right. They only see children as tools to generate profit. I feel the same about my side. No. James shook his head. Their level of scum is worse. Your parents are just hanging on for profit, but mine, they'll try to take everything. Then what should we do? His use of the word take startled me. We had finally found a family filled with love and trust. I didn't want anyone to be hurt. I have an idea. I'll make sure the condo's security is tight against intruders. So Linda, please protect the kids when you're outside of the house. I'm not sure if I can handle it alone. I'll ask a security company through Richard. They'll discreetly guard you when you're out. Understood. I responded. Since then, I've chosen popular places for outings with the kids. I also actively participated in gatherings with mom friends. It's harder for them to harm us when we're in a group. But still, there was a time when someone tried to kidnap one of the kids. It first happened at the park while playing with the other kids. I thought I would just be chatting with mom friends while we watched our kids play. But then, a plump middle-aged woman, who seemed to be just strolling, suddenly picked up Mary and started running. Luckily, the security guard, who was watching over us discreetly, quickly intervened. But the woman who tried to kidnap Mary ran away with surprising agility. In the end, we never found out why or who was behind it. People, be careful, it's a scary world out there. Everyone would just say. We agreed on a common understanding to be wary of both money motives and pranks. But I had forgotten one thing to be wary of. Hey there. I ran into my parents in the condo's parking lot. It was right after shopping with the kids, as we were getting out of the car. I quickly turned back into the car and locked it. Blatantly, my parents started banging on the car windows. Mom, why are Grandpa and Grandma doing this? I'm scared. I cracked the window just enough to speak through it. I really didn't want to open it, but we couldn't talk with it closed. What do you want? Ah, you finally opened it. Listen, Linda, could you please talk to James? What? You know, isn't it a bit off that young James is becoming the next chairman? Shouldn't it be William's turn? A chill ran down my spine. Could it be that these people? Dad, did someone ask you to do this? What? I don't know what you're talking about. Dad pretended not to know what I was talking about. And Mom said, You're always so stubborn. Just go and convince your husband, James. Say the chairman should be William because it's better for the company and step down. Or else. In Mom's hand was something like a crowbar. Then she swung it high and crash, the window shattered. The kids screamed. Mom reached her hand through the broken window. "Get down!" I yelled to the kids and frantically honked the horn, signaling to the security guard who must have been nearby. Thankfully, several men soon came running. Tisk! My parents clicked their tongues and quickly left the scene, escaping in a nearby car. "Are you okay?" The security guards asked us. "I'm fine, but the kids." "I'm okay," Daniel responded loudly. But it was true that shards of glass had fallen on both of them. "I'll head back to our room now. Can you escort us to the entrance, please?" The guards agreed and escorted us. The manager was surprised at our situation and promised to thoroughly guard against outsiders. That night, I told James everything. My own parents, of all people. They must have been convinced. Offering a good position if they become chairman or something. It was likely. Very likely. Why did both our parents have to be such people? This is seriously bad. I'll go to Richard and ask him to look after you and the kids for a while. To Richard? Yes, but we have to make sure we're not noticed. Also, I'll contact Susan. I want her to stay with you and the kids for a bit. But won't that be a burden on Susan? Considering who we're dealing with, it's necessary. They might think the same thing could happen to Susan since she's of the same bloodline. We're better off making a united front. With that, James immediately contacted Susan. Unbelievable. Those people. All right, James, I'll join you. What about Robert? Robert's got work, right? Well, yeah, but okay, I'll talk to him. Thanks. It's good to have siblings at times like this. I thought to myself. And the next day, Susan came over promptly. I told Robert about the situation, and he said he's got something to look into and will join us later. Really? Robert's reliable. Well, he is the man I chose. We laughed together. But the day after that conversation, the call from the police came. We've found James Smith's car at the bottom of a cliff. I couldn't grasp the meaning of the words immediately. What does that mean? He was brought into the hospital earlier. I couldn't quite process the rest of the words. Mrs. Smith, are you listening? I heard the voice from the other end, but I couldn't move right away. Shocked, Susan took over the call. After that, it felt like I was just being dragged around by Susan everywhere. We went to the police, confirmed things, and were handed an envelope found on the dashboard. A will. When opened, there was a printed letter inside. The content was, I can't bear the burden of being nominated as chairman, I'm sorry. That's what it said. So, has the police concluded that James took his own life? No, there's still an autopsy and other procedures, so the final conclusion will come later. We're just showing you this because it was found. There's no way he'd do this to himself. I was shouting loudly. James, who always told us to be careful. I couldn't find any more words after that. The police said, We'll contact you when it's time to return James's body. And sent us home. I can't clearly remember what happened for a while after that. The local news on TV was saying, it's not yet clear whether it was an accident. Having said that, they also said, a suicide note was found, and there's a strong belief that he took his own life. That was how it was reported on the news. I was so angry, I turned off the TV, and the kids looked at me anxiously. Is Daddy coming back? Daniel is 8, Mary just 5. Both of them had been taken out of school and kindergarten for a while. I was truly grateful Susan was there. My mind felt like it was covered with a thin film at that time, everything felt unreal. However, a week after the car was found, an envelope arrived with a specific delivery date. Linda, take a look at this. Susan handed it to me, who was in a daze. I glanced at the sender's name and my eyes widened. James? In a rush, I took the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. And a key. Read this without our parents finding out. Of course, I knew that. But he probably wanted to write it that way. This is something I wrote in advance in case something happened. If I'm there when you receive it, just give it back to me. But if I'm not, please, Linda, take what's stored in this locker and run to Richard's place immediately. Susan and I, reading it together, looked at each other. Then hurriedly, taking only the bare minimum, we took the kids and all got into Susan's car. My car had been under repair since that time. I didn't feel confident driving a rental car to Richard's in the next state. So, I relied on Susan. Leave it to me, just wear a hat and a mask, Susan said with a smile. And then we drove non-stop. We were anxious until we reached Richard's house in the next state. I assumed security guards were nearby. But after what happened to James, I was worried something might happen to the car. While on the road, I contacted Richard's house. We're on our way. We parked inside the property and hurried towards the main house. Richard and his wife Nancy were already there to greet us. We're glad you're here, Linda, Susan. James asked us to guard you guys, and said he'd send you guys here eventually. But to think it would come to this. Thank you for having us. I'm sorry. This was the only place we could turn to. I apologized deeply. The kids were looking around the grand entrance in amazement. Don't worry. I didn't expect it to come to this. I underestimated them. I never thought they'd actually target James himself, those bastards. Richard clenched his fist in frustration. We were led into a large, cozy living room. The room had a calm and warm atmosphere. Nancy instructed the housekeeper, then brought the kids to a corner of the room with some snacks. Thank you so much. It's all right. You want to keep the kids in sight right now, don't you? Yes, I didn't want to take my eyes off of them even for a moment. But the conversation we were about to have was not something I wanted the children to hear directly. William has always been rotten, but we lacked a decisive move to exclude him from the group. Letting him float around led to this mess. It's not your fault, Richard. My parents were involved in this too. James and I both had terrible parents. If only we had adopted James into our family earlier. Nancy muttered. Then Richard looked up. That's right, that's a good idea. Call the lawyer. Richard, I don't want those kids to end up like James. Richard said this and made me a proposal. Eventually, James's body, after the autopsy, was brought to Richard's house. For a private funeral and a memorial service within the group. I attended with the kids, as the representative of the bereaved family. Behind us, my parents sat shamelessly as James's in-laws. Colleagues from the company, all puzzled and saddened by James's sudden loss, were in attendance. He was truly an excellent employee. We were looking forward to his future in the group. Thank you. James would be honored to hear that. I mechanically repeated these greetings. Friends who joined the company at the same time as James were. How could this happen? Crying over the sudden loss. Everyone who had personal ties with James was genuinely good. But their parents. After the memorial service, Richard gathered the family, my parents, and the executives at his house. The large garden and halls of Richard's house were crowded with people. Then, someone came running in. Robert! He must have just arrived. Robert came running in, clutching a bag. Sorry I'm late, Susan, Linda. There were a lot of complications on my end. But it's good that the memorial service and the meeting were scheduled for today. It worked out. Robert had a sly smile. I'll return this to you. Robert took out a set of documents and a USB drive from his bag. Is it all settled? It was from the locker indicated by the key we received earlier. After leaving in Susan's car, we met up with Robert, who made copies of the documents and the drive. You've given the copies to our lawyer, right? Yes. That's good. We really needed the originals here. I nodded vigorously. At the meeting that started, Richard spoke in front of everyone about the incident, expressing his regrets over losing James, the successor. Then, when he paused, Richard continued. It's a real shame. And I think there's one thing I was wrong about. Richard called me and my two kids forward. The kids, understandably, looked frightened and almost tearful amidst the row of adults. I told them, "It's okay," and supported them from behind. Here, I want to appoint the next successors. My new children, Daniel and Mary. They are James's children, but I have adopted them. The children? The crowd murmured. Many might be surprised. But I believe this tragedy occurred because I left James as just a nephew. Right? At Richard's words, all eyes turned to my in-laws. Richard, what are you saying? Should I say it here? Yes, go ahead. James took his own life, right? A suicide note was found. Probably couldn't handle the expectations. Really? You still have more to say. Yes. And these children as Richard's adoptees? Putting unnecessary pressure on them again? Well, they are William's grandchildren, so maybe they won't feel that much pressure. Ugh. William's face twisted. Actually, James didn't take his own life. Richard declared firmly. The crowd stirred. What are you saying? The note was found in the dashboard. No media outlet reported that it was found in the dashboard. That's when Robert spoke up. May I? He asked Richard for permission to speak. Please, go ahead. Meanwhile, William was visibly struggling. But if it was found in the car, then... That's just it. We haven't leaked anything to the media. Or perhaps, William, you weren't really interested in my affairs. Saying this, Robert pulled out a police badge from his suit pocket. Yes, Robert was a detective in the state police where we lived. Ugh. William choked on his words. Did he really not realize? I was genuinely astonished. Indeed, Susan had said, we haven't been in touch since he got the job. So I have heard about it before. Even when they got married, they only reported so. But shouldn't one at least be aware of the other's profession? That's just the kind of person he is. Susan's whisper was quietly heard. I could only provide crucial evidence for the investigation, being an insider. Then Robert explained. The police had been thoroughly investigating the car retrieved from the cliff since the beginning. They soon realized that the brakes had been tampered with, which happened to be on the day James sent a letter through a scheduled delivery. That day, James first went to place something in a locker at the station. Then, he went to a post office inside the station to send a letter to Linda. It took him some time. It was then that someone tampered with the brake fluid system. But that alone wasn't enough to cause immediate trouble. After that, James drove towards Richard's house. But on the way to here, there are several winding roads, right? Whispers began among the people around. Indeed. Many voices agreed. That's where a road rage incident happened, intentionally. And this road isn't always wide. Indeed, a local quirk is that despite being a frequently used road, it's surprisingly narrow in places. In such a situation, forced to precisely apply the brakes due to a road rage, I'm sure James soon realized the brakes were failing, but it was too late. So, that's what happened? Richard asked gravely. His words were vague, but the meaning was clear to all. Yes. And the police have identified the road rage driver from James's dashcam and have already apprehended him. Robert said, smiling wryly at my in-laws. But what does that have to do with us? The road rage participant was just a hired hand. The direct employer is still unknown. However, William, you and your wife are facing separate charges. Separate charges? Yes. For the embezzlement you've been committing for years. James had been secretly investigating this matter. This is the evidence. Suddenly, multiple projectors operated from somewhere lit up every wall with various documents. We will now arrest you for this embezzlement. Then, the back door opened and police officers entered. And one more thing. Robert glanced at me, then turned to another direction. You there. What, us? My parents hesitated. You're being arrested for damaging Linda's car. But that's just a family matter. Mom protested. I turned to her, asking sharply. A parent who breaks a car window with a bar? Indifferent to glass falling on their grandchildren's heads? I glared with all my might and said, You're not parents. My parents slumped back in their seats. Afterward, my in-laws, arrested for embezzlement, confessed to planning James's death during questioning, adding to their charges. My parents were also charged with aiding in their plan, in addition to property damage. The case was first leaked to local media, then reported by regional newspapers and local news. But it didn't end there. Given the sensational nature of the crime and the involvement of biological parents, it became fodder for national news and tabloid TV. And in this day and age, that was not enough. This was the digital age, they were branded indelibly. Even if they were released, what could they possibly do? But that's not my concern anymore. Since then, we've been living at Richard's house. His wife adores our 2 new children. Nancy, who always wanted but couldn't have children, is perhaps overindulging them a bit. But for now, that's okay. The kids, having just lost their dad, had to switch schools. I feel guilty for involving them in adult conflicts. But I believe this is the safest option. As for Richard, I must stay healthy at least until the kids are grown. He's diligently working on his fitness. Everyone, tea is ready. I spend my days in this house taking care of the kids and keeping these 2 company. I'm not sure how much I can contribute to them, but for the kids' sake, I'll keep doing my best.